Why, hello and welcome. We are still up in the Scottish Highlands, but this time we are looking at the Scottish Highlands with James Boswell. So it's the other half of the travel journal that we had a look at last time. But before we begin, for your literary aspirations, the Black Cockie Press 12-week novel writing masterclass on sale, still on sale, still available. Links down below. Get it. Good. Now, this week we are having a look at James Boswell's travel journal. So James Boswell was Scottish. He was a lawyer. Now, we all know what my thoughts about lawyers being writers, don't we? No? Generally speaking, their books are a waste of perfectly good paper. That is my general opinion of lawyers who write books. Sorry. Not sorry. So, but Boswell actually can write. He wasn't a lawyer because he wanted to be a lawyer. He was a lawyer because his father, the judge, made him become a lawyer. And he was, by all accounts, a fairly indifferent advocate. So he met Johnson when he was in London and became great friends with him. And it's from this friendship that they go on this tour of Scotland. Now, Boswell's chief claim to fame is his Johnson's biographer. He wrote the life of Johnson. So much of what we know about Johnson does come from Boswell. And that makes him quite interesting. He was an enormous friend and admirer of Johnson. So huge fanboy, like serious fanboy. So that is in some way gives you a little bit of an idea about how this book can be read, because he wrote journals at the time when he was travelling Scotland with Johnson, just as Johnson did. Johnson had put out his journals much earlier than Boswell did. And Johnson's journals, as we saw last time, are much more his impressions of the Highlands and the Hebrides. Boswell's journals are quite different. They're much more sculpted than Johnson's. No doubt you will have seen, having read it, assuming you read it. They're much more sculpted than Johnson's. They are much neater. They actually go through it dates rather than places. So you go, okay, well, August and then September and so on and so forth. So you actually get an idea of when anything is happening. That's a bit vague with Johnson. You get a lot more history and a lot more context for a lot of things. Obviously, Boswell is Scottish. This is his country. He's showing this to his great friend. And so therefore, there is a lot more context in Boswell about just Scottish history, things that have happened, which you don't find in Johnson. Johnson's is more impressionistic. So they're very different books. Finally, and probably most importantly, Boswell is writing this, or tidies up his journals and writes his travel journals, after Johnson has died. And really, the thing that comes through most strongly is this is a beautiful reminiscence of a period of time when these two friends were traveling, and it's a love letter to Johnson. He clearly adores his friend. Now, this was something that the 18th century satirists picked up on, because this is the cover. And hopefully you can see there is Johnson and there is Boswell. And as I was reading this, the thing, so like Boswell is sort of skipping along beside Johnson. Boswell is a Flopsy bunny. He is a Beatrix Potter Flopsy bunny to Johnson's Mr. Badger. And I don't mean that as an insult to either of them. Calling Johnson Mr. Badger is possibly one of the highest compliments I can give him, because Mr. Badger is my absolute favourite. He's from my absolute favourite childhood story, which is Wind in the Willows. So that's the Mr. Badger. Mr. Badger is the authority. He is old. He's an older one of the animals, and he can beat up weasels and hold his own. He is absolutely the thing. So calling Johnson Mr. Badger is not an insult. So I hope Johnson fans don't take it as such. But Boswell is a Flopsy bunny. If Johnson is Mr. Badger, Boswell is one of the Flopsy bunnies. I can't actually find a character in Wind in the Willows that suits, like, when I was reading it and I'm like, he's a bloody Flopsy bunny. He just does, it's like his whole diary is, and that goes for the writing as well. Like I'm not talking about him as a person so much, but as his writing. If Johnson, because there is such a thing as, just as there is a thing as Johnsonese, there is such a thing as Boswellese. And if Johnson is vigorous and contains half a dozen different ideas in a single sentence and possibly too many words, but it's so engaging, and you just pay attention to it because you've got this big gnarly badger talking to you. Boswell is a Flopsy bunny. Boswell is his complete ability, which is quite remarkable. It really is quite remarkable to efface himself and focus so entirely on his subject. And in this, his subject is, just as it is in the life of Johnson. He is fascinated by Johnson. He is fascinated by how Johnson reacts to things. So Johnson is looking at Scotland. Boswell is looking at Johnson looking at Scotland. But it does include, the first few entries are just really hard, because like he meets up with Johnson and then they're in Edinburgh where he lives, and they go to his house, and then people drop in and he does an awful lot of name dropping, and so came and they had tea, and that was really nice, and that's why I call him a Flopsy bunny, because so came and had tea and it was really nice, and then there's so else came to tea, and so came to breakfast, and then we went out and visited so Flopsy bunny. So that's so the first couple of entries are a little bit slow going because he's making sure not to forget anybody. He's clearly not, whereas Johnson doesn't care if he offends. He's like, what do I care? I'm Johnson. Boswell isn't that. Boswell is absolutely charming character, but the book itself doesn't really pick up steam until they get out of Edinburgh and start heading into the Highlands. But it is a really interesting read. It gives you a lot more context to things than Johnson, so they do read well together. But be aware that Boswell is not the writer Johnson is. So I am sorry it took me such a long time to get to this. But we are heading, I was going to do another Scottish book, but due to some time pressures, I really don't have time to do another big fat book at the moment. So next time, and it might be, even though it's a skinny book, it might be another 6 to 8 weeks until I get to it completely, is we're going to go back home and we're going to be travelling through the Lake District with the lyrical ballads by Coleridge and Wordsworth. I thought we'd do something completely different from a travel diary or a novel. We'd have a look at romantic poetry and some of the early romantic poetry, the lyrical ballads. So we're expanding our book club out a little bit from its original parameters around the novel. We already have expanded it out with travel writing. We have some more travel writing coming up after this, but just at the moment, we're going to have a look at some poetry. Since we've edged Georgian out into the early 19th century with George IV, we will also end up having a look at some Keats, because I adore Keats. I don't like Shelley, don't like Byron, do adore Keats, so we will get to Keats as well. But until then, I hope you enjoyed travelling Scotland with Johnson and Boswell and having a little bit of a look at the taming of Scotland with Sir Walter Scott. My Scottish dress will keep turning up because I love this thing. So we may not be in Scotland, but I will continue to wear my Jacobin dress. I love my Jacobin dress. Anyway, I will see you again with the lyrical ballads. And until then, I hope you enjoy your literary travels, and goodbye. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other materials to help with your writing.